Hello and welcome, sleepy friend. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. Before we drift into the story, make yourself comfortable. Settle into bed or your favorite cozy chair. Put on your headphones, adjust the volume to a soft, gentle level. Take a deep breath in and let it out slowly. Feel your body relax from the top of your head down to your shoulders, your arms, your chest, your belly, your hips, your legs, and all the way to your toes. As we begin tonight's journey, remember, all the stories you hear are 100% factual. The real moments, real people, real places that shaped history. If you enjoy this bedtime journey, please remember to like the video, subscribe to Sleepy Time History, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now, close your eyes if you wish, and let's drift back, hundreds, even thousands of years ago, to the first peoples of North America. Before any flag was planted, before any anthem was sung, long before the distant hum of European sails on the Atlantic, this vast land, forests, plains, deserts, mountains, and rivers, was alive with the footsteps, songs, and dreams of millions of people. Tonight, let's drift back more than 15,000 years. Close your eyes, feel the cool winds of the last ice age, and picture bands of hunters and gatherers, crossing a land bridge called Beringia, a frozen highway that once connected Siberia to Alaska, when sea levels were lower and mammoths roamed the tundra. These early families followed herds of giant mammals, setting up camps beneath the glow of northern lights. They carried stone blades, bone needles, firestones, small tools, but mighty lifelines against a harsh world. As the glacier receded, these first Americans spread southward and eastward over centuries, finding new rivers to fish, forests to forage, grasslands teeming with bison and deer. They adapted to every imaginable landscape. On the windswept Great Plains, nomadic tribes like the ancestors of the Lakota and Cheyenne learned to follow the bison, crafting teepees that could be packed up in hours and reassembled on the endless horizon. In the dense eastern woodlands, where maples blazed red in autumn, the Haudenosaunee, known as the Iroquois Confederacy, built longhouses of elm bark and founded a political system based on shared councils and a great law of peace. Long before the founding fathers drafted their constitution, these woodland nations held council fires, where men and women both spoke for the future. Far to the south, near the great rivers of the Mississippi Valley, an ancient city called Cahokia rose from the floodplains. Picture it, the year is around 1100 CE. Tens of thousands of people gather at Cahokia, where enormous earthen mounds stand like man-made hills. Monk's Mound, the largest, towers 10 stories high, overlooking plazas, homes, temples, and markets. Here, farmers raise fields of corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters that sustain life season after season. Artisans craft shell beads and copper tools. Traders carry goods from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. At night, fires flicker atop the mounds. Priests and leaders perform ceremonies under the stars, thanking spirits for the harvest, the rain, the turning sun. In the desert southwest, the ancestral Puebloans often called the Anasazi, carved stone cities. Into the cliffsides of Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon. Multi-story dwellings, built from sandstone and timber, shelter entire communities from scorching summers and bitter winters. Imagine standing at the center of Chaco Canyon, where kivas, round, underground ceremonial rooms, echo with the chants of dancers in painted masks. Petroglyphs on the canyon walls tell stories of the hunt, the rains, the spirits who watch over all things. Farther west, along the Pacific coast, great cedar forests provide shelter and sustenance for the Tlingit, Haida, and Coast Salish peoples. They carve towering totem poles, mythic stories captured in wood, ravens, bears, wolves, whales. Villages gather for potlatches, ceremonial feasts where families share their wealth, sing songs, and pass down the ancient stories that bind generations together. The lands now called the United States were never empty wilderness, they were living, breathing worlds, woven with trade routes, seasonal camps, sacred grounds, and ancient burial sites. There were nations whose names you may still hear today: the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole. In the southeast, the Navajo and Apache in the southwest, the Shoshone, Nez Perce, and Ute across the Rocky Mountains, the Lenape, Susquehannock, and Powhatan along the Atlantic coast. Each people spoke languages as diverse as the songs of birds. Some tongues are still spoken in schools and homes today. Others fell silent under centuries of colonial pressure, yet live on in stories, place names, and whispers on the wind. Historians believe that by the time Europeans first glimpsed these shores, up to 10 million people lived in North America. They hunted, farmed, traded, made war, made peace, built cities and ceremonial centers, and passed down wisdom through generations. Creation stories told of the Sky Woman, who fell to earth on the back of a turtle's shell, or the trickster coyote who shaped rivers with his tail, or the Great Spirit who set the sun, moon, and stars in motion. To their descendants today, these are not myths. They are memories, the truths of how a people came to be, and how they remain rooted in these lands. When you walk along rivers, stand atop a forest ridge, or hear the wind rush across the plains, know that you stand on ground once held sacred by those who came first, the keepers of the old trails, the ones whose footprints lie beneath every modern road and city. So tonight, as your eyelids grow heavy, breathe in the timelessness of this land. Imagine the embers of a fire in a longhouse, children drifting to sleep under firs, elders telling stories that stretch back to the beginning. May your dreams carry you across open plains, through ancient forests, and down hidden canyons, where the spirit of the first Americans still walks, and the land remembers every heartbeat that ever was. Drift deeper now, carried by the tide of centuries, as we leave the ancient fires of the first Americans, and sail toward the moment when distant empires first caught sight of these shores. The year is 1492. Far across the Atlantic Ocean, kingdoms of Europe stand restless, hungry, and hopeful. In castles and ports from Spain to Portugal to England, Merchants and monarchs dream of spices from India, silks from China, and gold to fill their treasuries. Maps at this time are riddled with sea monsters and swirling winds, blank spaces marked "Here be dragons." No one knows for certain what lies beyond the horizon. Christopher Columbus, an Italian sailor with a vision, persuades the Spanish crown to fund his voyage westward. In the early dawn of October 12, 1492, Columbus and his weary crew sight land. They step ashore not in Asia as he believed, but on islands in the Caribbean, lands alive with people, languages, and lives that had thrived here long before European sails appeared. Word of this discovery spreads like wildfire. It sparks a race among European empires: Spain, France, England, and the Netherlands, each desperate to plant flags in this so-called New World. In 1497, John Cabot, an Italian explorer sailing for England, reaches the rocky shores of Newfoundland. He reports waters teeming with fish so thick one could lower a basket and raise it brimming. By 1513, a Spanish explorer named Juan Ponce de Leon lands in Florida, seeking the fountain of youth. He finds no magical spring but instead encounters thriving communities of the Timucua and Calusa peoples, who watch these strangers with wary eyes. A few decades later, the conquistador Hernando de Soto embarks on an epic journey through the southeast, wandering forests, crossing rivers like the Alabama and the mighty Mississippi. His expedition brings with it metal armor, war horses, and foreign diseases, leaving scars that will ripple for centuries. Farther north, in the early 1500s, French fishermen begin to arrive along the Atlantic coast and St. Lawrence River, drawn by cod and fur. In 1534, Jacques Cartier sails into the St. Lawrence, claiming vast tracts for the King of France. He meets the St. Lawrence Iroquoians at Stadacona, where Quebec City now stands, exchanging beads and iron knives for furs. The French explore deep inland, learning to navigate rivers, trading with the Huron, Algonquin, and Montagnais. Missionaries and fur trappers follow, wearing snowshoes, paddling birch-bark canoes, and surviving brutal winters alongside native allies. Meanwhile, the English seek a permanent foothold. In 1585, they attempt to settle Roanoke Island, off the coast of present-day North Carolina. The lost colony famously vanishes, a mystery whispered through history. No sign of the settlers remains but the word Croatoan, carved into a post, a puzzle unsolved to this day. In 1607, the English succeed at last. A band of settlers lands at Jamestown, Virginia, the first permanent English settlement in North America. They build rough palisades against the wilderness, hoping for gold but finding only hardship. The land around Jamestown belongs to the Powhatan Confederacy, a network of tribes led by Chief Powhatan. The settlers' survival depends on uneasy alliances and fragile truces. In the stories that echo through history, a young woman named Pocahontas, Powhatan's daughter, emerges as a bridge between cultures, bringing food to starving colonists, serving as a symbol, part truth, part myth, of a fleeting peace. But winter is cruel. The starving time sees settlers boil shoe leather for soup. By spring, only 60 of the original 500 settlers remain. Yet, more ships arrive. Tobacco, Virginia's gold, takes root, fueling profits and the brutal expansion of plantations. In 1620, seeking religious freedom, another band of English travelers crosses the Atlantic. On a small ship called the Mayflower, the Pilgrims land at Plymouth Rock, Massachusetts, where the Wampanoag people watch them with cautious eyes. A man named Tisquantum, known as Squanto, who had been kidnapped by earlier explorers and learned English abroad, teaches the newcomers how to plant corn, find fish, and survive the harsh New England winter. Their first successful harvest becomes the tale of the first Thanksgiving, a symbol of harmony, though the true history is more complex. Over the next decades, colonies multiply along the eastern seaboard. Massachusetts, Maryland, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and the Carolinas. Forests are felled, rivers redirected, native hunting grounds claimed. Ships from across the Atlantic bring more settlers, more goods, and soon, enslaved Africans, the beginnings of a cruel trade that will forever shape the soul of America. Native nations respond with courage and resilience. Some, like the Powhatan and Pequot, resist fiercely in battle. Others, like the Iroquois Confederacy, negotiate alliances with competing European powers, mastering the art of diplomacy, while protecting ancestral lands as best they can. This first contact, the age of exploration, is not a single story but countless stories interwoven. Curiosity, ambition, greed, courage, betrayal, friendship, and profound loss. As you breathe gently, imagine the creak of wooden ships at anchor in quiet coves, the hush of paddles in a moonlit river, the flicker of lanterns in a fort on a lonely coast. Picture families gathered in wigwams and longhouses, listening to elders speak of spirits and prophesize, while across the sea, kings and queens toast their distant conquests, never truly grasping the lands they claim. This was the beginning of America as the world knows it. Two worlds colliding under the same stars, forever changing the fate of millions. Drift deeper now. The sails have landed, the forts are built, and by the dawn of the 1600s, the eastern seaboard begins to blossom with tiny European outposts, fragile seeds that will grow into bustling colonies. In these early decades, life is hard and often cruel. Settlers cling to the coasts, forests press in on all sides. Storms batter wooden cabins, crops fail under unfamiliar seasons. Yet, they endure. They cut timber, plant tobacco, build mills by rivers that once ran wild through untouched lands. Soon, the colonies spread, Virginia, Maryland, the Carolinas, Georgia to the south, New England towns to the north, and New Netherland, which the English seize and rename New York. Native peoples watch with a mix of wonder and alarm. Some trade, beaver pelts for iron knives, axes, and muskets. Some resist, defending hunting grounds, burning settlements, striking back when treaties are broken. The Pequot War of 1636 and King Philip's War of 1675 leave entire villages in flames. Wampanoag leader Metacom, whom the English call King Philip, unites several tribes in a desperate attempt to push the colonists back. His warriors raid towns, lay siege to forts. But the power of the English colonies grows with each ship that arrives. By the early 1700s, the 13 colonies stretch from Maine to Georgia, home to more than 1 million settlers, from Puritans and Quakers, to merchants, farmers, indentured servants, and the enslaved. It is here that America's deepest contradiction takes root. A land seeking freedom, yet built on bondage. In 1619, the first recorded Africans arrive in Virginia, brought by English privateers who captured them from a Portuguese slave ship. Though some gain freedom in those early years, the plantation system soon locks slavery in place, first in tobacco fields, then on rice and indigo plantations. In the Carolinas and Georgia, families are torn apart and sold like livestock. Slave codes strip away basic rights. Yet enslaved people resist, through quiet sabotage, secret gatherings, whispered songs that carry hope. Beyond the fields, in cities like Boston, Philadelphia, and Charleston, diverse communities grow: English, Scots-Irish, Germans, Dutch, Africans, free and enslaved alike. Cobblestone streets bustle with markets, taverns, and docks. Church bells ring over village greens. People gather in wooden meeting houses to debate the Bible, town laws, and taxes imposed by faraway kings. The Great Awakening sweeps the colonies in the 1730s and 1740s. Itinerant preachers like George Whitefield stir crowds with fiery sermons under open skies. Old churches fracture, new ones blossom, and ordinary people feel a new sense of voice, a hint that authority can be questioned, that faith and freedom are deeply entwined. Tensions simmer with Britain. The colonies flourish, but the crown wants its share. New taxes, new laws, new restrictions on trade. Colonists grumble. Pamphlets pass from hand to hand, inked with bold words about natural rights and self-rule. Benjamin Franklin, born in Boston but made in Philadelphia, writes witty essays, prints newspapers, and becomes a voice for the colonies abroad. Ordinary farmers and artisans gather at taverns to read the news by candlelight, discussing Parliament's decrees, with tankards of ale in hand. In the backwoods, the frontier expands ever westward. Scots-Irish settlers push into the Appalachian Mountains, building cabins among Cherokee and Shawnee lands, often sparking new conflicts. In 1754, the French and Indian War ignites, a clash of empires that will drag on for nearly a decade. The British, the French, and dozens of native nations battle for control of the Ohio River Valley and the vast interior forests. Young George Washington, then just a brash Virginia officer, fights for the British crown, learning the rugged ways of frontier war. When the war ends in 1763, Britain claims vast new territories. But protecting and governing them costs money. To pay the debt, Parliament levies taxes: the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts. They seem small in London's eyes but loom large in colonial minds. No taxation without representation becomes a rallying cry. In Boston, anger boils over. In 1770, British soldiers fire into a crowd during a tense standoff. The Boston Massacre, it will be called, and it fuels the flames of rebellion. 3 years later, in 1773, disguised as Mohawk warriors, angry colonists board ships in Boston Harbor and toss crates of tea into the dark waters, a defiant protest that will echo worldwide. Meanwhile, enslaved Africans listen by candlelight, wondering if this talk of liberty will ever mean freedom for them. Native nations, too, watch uneasily as settlers push further west, wondering if any promise will hold true. By the mid-1770s, the colonies stand at a crossroads. 13 separate outposts, bound by trade and kinship, and now, by a shared hunger to decide their own fate. In the quiet of a Philadelphia meeting hall, men gather to talk of independence. Farmers, lawyers, printers, and planters, debating with quills and parchment what it means to break away from the mightiest empire on earth. They could not yet know the storms ahead, the frozen camps, the bloody fields, the ringing words that would birth a new nation. But in the hush before the storm, the seeds of rebellion are firmly planted, deep in the soil of a land that has known millennia of stories, and is about to write a new one. Breathe deeply now. You've traveled from ancient trails and sacred fires to the crowded streets and flickering lanterns of colonial towns. But now, the winds shift. Now, history begins to crackle like kindling, and the colonies stir with revolution. It is 1775. In the quiet town of Lexington, Massachusetts, just as dawn lifts the night, British redcoats and colonial militia face one another on a village green. A shot rings out, no one knows who fired first. But in that instant, a war begins. Stand your ground, Captain Parker is said to have warned his men. Don't fire unless fired upon, but if they mean to have a war, let it begin here. And so it did. From Lexington and Concord, the flames spread. Word gallops through the colonies on horseback and rumor. Farmers leave their plows. Merchants close their shops. Militiamen gather their powder and muskets, ready to defend the homes they've built, the towns they've carved out of forest and stone. In Philadelphia, the Second Continental Congress convenes. They appoint George Washington, tall and quiet, a former surveyor from Virginia, as commander of the Continental Army. He accepts the role with humility, aware that his ragtag force of militias, farmers, and frontiersmen will soon face the largest, best-equipped army in the world. The British Empire commands not just redcoats, but hired Hessian soldiers from Germany, naval fleets that darken the Atlantic, and generals with decades of experience. Washington commands men who march barefoot, wrap rags around bleeding feet, and carry more hope than ammunition. Still, they fight. In Boston, the rebels dig in on Breed's Hill. British troops charge up the slope again and again, bayonets fixed. Colonial militia hold their ground until their powder runs dry. They lose the hill, but win something greater, confidence. Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes. The legend says they were told a lesson in patience, precision, and resolve. By 1776, the idea of reconciliation fades. The colonies are no longer seeking fairness. They want freedom. On July 2, 1776, the Continental Congress votes for independence. 2 days later, on July 4, they approve the Declaration of Independence, authored by a young Virginian named Thomas Jefferson. Its words burn through time. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. A bold statement, written in a world where slavery still exists, where women cannot vote, where freedom remains complicated. And yet, those words echo with possibility, a dream that even the founders themselves did not fully grasp. The war drags on. In New York, Washington suffers defeat after defeat. British troops push the rebels out of Manhattan and Brooklyn. But Washington doesn't give up. He retreats, regroups, and waits for winter. On Christmas night, 1776, he crosses the icy Delaware River in silence. His men cold, hungry, wrapped in scraps of cloth. They surprise the Hessian garrison at Trenton, capturing nearly 1,000 soldiers without losing a man. It is a turning point, small, but vital. In the South, fighting is brutal. Neighbors turn on one another. Loyalists, colonists who still support the crown, clash with patriots in skirmishes that pit families against each other. In the North, the British occupy cities: New York, Philadelphia, Boston. But the countryside burns with rebellion. France watches from across the sea, at first skeptical, then intrigued. When the American victory at Saratoga proves the colonies can hold their own, France joins the fight, sending troops, ships, and silver. The Marquis de Lafayette, a young French nobleman, joins Washington's camp, bringing European tactics and a passion for liberty. By 1781, the war reaches its climax. In Yorktown, Virginia, British General Cornwallis finds himself surrounded. Washington marches south. French ships block the harbor. 4 days, cannon fire rains down on British positions. On October 19th, Cornwallis surrenders. The British band plays "The World Turned Upside Down." And in many ways, it has. 2 years later, the Treaty of Paris is signed. The war is over. A new nation is born, the United States of America. But the journey is far from finished. The revolution has brought freedom to some, but not to all. Slavery remains legal in much of the country. Native nations, who fought on both sides, find themselves squeezed further off their ancestral lands. And the government? It's fragile, a collection of agreements and promises, bound by hope more than stability. Still, something extraordinary has begun. A people, once ruled by kings and distant parliaments, now hold the power to shape their own future. In the stillness of a Pennsylvania field, a boy who once carried water to soldiers at Valley Forge looks up at the stars, wondering what this new country will become. And somewhere, deep in the hush of the night, a tired general named George Washington stares into the fire. His duty done, his sword soon to be hung up for peace. Sleep now, knowing that what began with musket shots and midnight riders has ended with the dawn of a nation. Imperfect, uncertain, but brimming with dreams. Rest now in the hush that follows revolution. The muskets are silent, the soldiers return to farms and workshops. But the true test of this new America is only just beginning. 13 colonies have won their freedom. But can they hold it together? In the early years, the fledgling country is bound by the Articles of Confederation, an agreement that gives the states more power than the national government. It's a start, but it's fragile. Each state acts like its own small country, printing money, collecting taxes, setting trade rules. Debts from the war loom large. Farmers struggle under rising costs. Merchants face closed ports and foreign threats. In 1786, these tensions erupt in western Massachusetts. A veteran named Daniel Shays leads a rebellion of farmers who can't pay their debts. They march on courthouses, demanding relief. Though the rebellion is put down, its echoes shake the new nation. Leaders realize they need something stronger than a loose alliance of states. So, in May 1787, 55 delegates gather in Philadelphia's State House, later called Independence Hall. Among them are men whose names will echo through time. George Washington, chosen to preside. Benjamin Franklin, now in his 80s, witty, wise, a calming presence. Alexander Hamilton, brilliant and ambitious, eager for a strong central government. James Madison, quiet and studious, who will become the father of the Constitution. They close the windows against summer heat. To keep their debates secret, they argue fiercely, big states versus small, North versus South, federal power versus states' rights. In the end, they forge a new blueprint, the Constitution of the United States. It divides power between three branches: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, each designed to balance the others. It allows for amendments, acknowledging that a living nation must grow and change. When the work is done, Franklin is asked what they have created. A republic, he says, if you can keep it. Still, the new plan stirs fear. What about individual rights? What about the liberties they just fought for? So, in 1791, the Bill of Rights is ratified. 10 amendments guaranteeing freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to bear arms, the right to assemble, and protections against tyranny. In 1789, George Washington takes the oath as the first president. His inauguration is simple yet profound. A general laying aside his sword to serve as a leader of peace. He sets the tone: no king, no crown. Just a citizen chosen by fellow citizens. His cabinet takes shape. Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State. Alexander Hamilton as Secretary of the Treasury. Their visions clash. Jefferson dreams of an agrarian republic. Hamilton pushes for banks, industry, and a strong federal government. This rivalry shapes the first political parties: Federalists and Democratic Republicans. A tension that will ripple through every election to come. During these years, the capital moves. First Philadelphia, then a new city carved from swamp and forest. Along the Potomac River, Washington, D.C. They build grand stone buildings. The Capitol, the White House, symbols of democracy. Though behind their walls, heated debates rage on. In 1793, a second revolution erupts, not here, but in France. The young American Republic watches with mixed feelings. As old allies overthrow their king, Europe plunges into war, and the US struggles to stay neutral. Pirates prowl the Atlantic. Britain and France seize American ships. Washington, weary and wise, chooses not to seek a third term. His farewell address warns against entangling alliances and the dangers of political factions, words that generations will quote, yet rarely heed. After him comes John Adams, prickly and principled, whose presidency is marked by storms abroad and tensions at home. The Alien and Sedition Acts, laws that silence critics, raise fears that liberty is already slipping away. In 1800, power shifts peacefully, a remarkable moment in history. Thomas Jefferson becomes the third president. In what he calls the Revolution of 1800, the first time a new political party takes power without violence. Under Jefferson, the nation doubles in size overnight. In 1803, he negotiates the Louisiana Purchase with France, 828,000 square miles for $15 million, opening a vast frontier from the Mississippi to the Rockies. To chart this wilderness, he sends Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. Their Corps of Discovery sets out in 1804, paddling up the Missouri, guided in part by a Shoshone woman named Sacagawea. They face rapids, grizzlies, endless plains, and towering mountains. When they reach the Pacific in 1805, they gaze at waves that stretch toward Asia, proof that this new republic, barely a generation old, holds a destiny bigger than anyone imagined. Yet even in these days of promise, deep shadows remain. Enslaved people toil in cotton fields that spread across the South. Native nations see settlers flood into their hunting grounds, pushing them further west with each treaty broken. A new flag waves over a fragile country. 13 stars in a circle at first, then 15, then more, as states join the Union. Underneath it all, one question whispers through the night. Can this republic survive its contradictions? For now, the people are hopeful. They farm the land, print newspapers, debate in taverns, and dream of what lies beyond the next river bend. In the stillness of a candlelit room, a mother hums a lullaby to a baby born free. In a nation unlike any other, may you drift off imagining those flickering lights. A new country daring to govern itself, carved from wilderness, built on ideals, forever a work in progress. Close your eyes and listen as the new nation stretches its limbs. The ink on the Constitution is barely dry, but already Americans are pushing west, chasing rivers, crossing plains, dreaming of boundless land and a fresh start. They call it manifest destiny, the belief that it is America's fate, even its duty, to spread from the Atlantic to the Pacific, to tame forests and mountains, to make a continent their own. But the land is not empty. Millions of native people have lived here for thousands of years. Cherokee, Creek, Seminole, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Lakota, Cheyenne, Kiowa, Apache. Nations with their own borders, languages, and sacred places. In the early 1800s, covered wagons roll out of towns like St. Louis. The Oregon Trail becomes a dusty ribbon, stretching 2,000 miles toward the far Pacific. Families leave behind crowded farms and city streets for a promise of fertile soil, fresh air, and a better life. Some find it. Many perish along the way, of fever, hunger, or wagon wheels. Splintered by rough ground, gravestones mark the trail like lonely sentinels. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson signs the Indian Removal Act. It gives the federal government the power to negotiate treaties that force native nations off their ancestral lands, lands that settlers covet for cotton and gold. Some tribes resist, taking their cases to American courts. In 1832, the Supreme Court rules in favor of the Cherokee Nation's sovereignty. Yet, the ruling is ignored. Powerful voices in Washington see only the land, not the people whose roots run deep there. The result is a chapter of sorrow, the Trail of Tears. In the winter of 1838, under harsh command, the Cherokee are rounded up at gunpoint. Families are herded into stockades like livestock. When the march begins, they walk 1,000 miles west to what is now Oklahoma. They wade through freezing rivers. They huddle in makeshift camps. Disease spreads. Food is scarce. Nearly a quarter of the Cherokee people die along the way. An estimated 4,000 souls lost to hunger, exposure, and exhaustion. Alongside them, the Choctaw, Creek, Chickasaw, and Seminole endure similar forced journeys, families torn apart, generations scattered from their homelands. Yet in the East, cities flourish. The Industrial Revolution transforms America's towns and factories. Cotton is king in the South. Vast plantations thrive, worked by millions of enslaved men, women, and children. In the North, factories hum with new machines. Textile mills spin cotton into cloth. Steamships paddle up mighty rivers. Railroads snake across farmland, steel rails gleaming in the sun. Immigrants arrive by the thousands from Ireland, Germany, and beyond, fleeing famine and poverty, seeking freedom and a chance to build a life. They settle in crowded tenements, labor in coal mines and mills, their dreams echoing those of the pioneers moving west. But as the nation grows, so does its divide. For every acre claimed, for every homestead staked, there is a cost, paid in native lives uprooted, in buffalo herds hunted near extinction, in promises made and broken by one treaty after another. Out on the frontier, families live by candlelight in sod houses and log cabins. Children learn to read by firelight, while fathers mend fences and mothers churn butter. With babies on their hips, they carve out towns from prairies, naming them independence, liberty, and hope. They build schools, churches, and saloons. Mail arrives by stagecoach. News spreads along telegraph wires that hum like distant lightning. Yet, under it all, a tension hums louder. The clash between freedom and bondage, expansion and displacement, dream and reality. In this vast new land, the seeds of conflict are already sown. The question of slavery shadows every new territory. Will the West be free or slaveholding? Each new state tips the balance. Each new law fans the fire. The dream of manifest destiny has made America bigger, but it has not made it whole. Somewhere on the plains, A child curls up beside a wagon wheel. Stars blinking above an endless prairie. In the distance, the howl of a lone wolf mingles with the murmurs of a restless nation. The journey west is far from over, and the roads ahead will demand more sacrifice, more struggle, and, perhaps, a reckoning that no one can yet see coming. Drift deeper now, as the American dream grows larger, and its greatest contradiction grows ever more impossible to ignore. In the early 1800s, slavery is an institution woven into the fabric of the young United States. In the South, vast cotton plantations rely on enslaved labor. Cotton is called white gold, feeding textile mills in New England and fueling a global economy. By 1860, nearly 4 million people are enslaved in America. Children born into bondage, families sold at auction blocks. Their names and stories scattered like leaves in the wind. Yet, even in this darkness, there are sparks of defiance. Some enslaved people find freedom by running north, guided by the stars and secret networks known as the Underground Railroad, a loose chain of safe houses and brave conductors who hide fugitives in cellars and haylofts. Harriet Tubman, born into slavery in Maryland, escapes and returns again and again, risking her life to lead dozens more to freedom. Her courage becomes legend, whispered from cabin to cabin, a reminder that bondage is not absolute. In cities like Boston and Philadelphia, abolitionists speak out. William Lloyd Garrison publishes The Liberator, calling slavery a sin that must be wiped from the land. Frederick Douglass, born enslaved in Maryland, teaches himself to read and escapes to the North. His words, thunderous, eloquent, shake the conscience of the nation. In lecture halls and church basements, he tells his story, reminding Americans of the promises they made in 1776. But for every voice calling for freedom, there is another defending slavery as a way of life. Southern leaders argue that their economy depends on it. They claim it is sanctioned by tradition and scripture. They pass stricter fugitive slave laws, demanding that even in free states, runaways must be returned to bondage. Tensions rise with each new compromise. In 1820, the Missouri Compromise tries to maintain balance, admitting Missouri as a slave state, Maine as free, drawing an invisible line across the continent, where slavery will be banned above and allowed below. But westward expansion keeps pushing that line. In 1850, the Compromise of 1850 and the Fugitive Slave Act inflame abolitionists further. Slave catchers prowl northern streets, kidnapping people back into bondage. Even those born free fear they could be dragged south, their freedom stolen. In 1852, Harriet Beecher Stowe publishes Uncle Tom's Cabin. The novel sells millions, opening northern eyes to the brutal reality of slavery. President Abraham Lincoln would later greet Stowe, calling her the little lady who made this big war. Violence breaks out in Kansas, bleeding Kansas. They call it, as pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers clash over whether the territory will allow human bondage. In 1857, the Supreme Court delivers the infamous Dred Scott decision. It rules that enslaved people are not citizens and have no right to sue for freedom. The decision outrages many, hardening the lines between North and South. Meanwhile, a lanky lawyer from Illinois, Abraham Lincoln, emerges onto the national stage. In debates with Senator Stephen Douglas, he warns that a house divided against itself cannot stand. In 1859, radical abolitionist John Brown raids the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. He hopes to spark a slave uprising. He is captured, tried, and hanged. But his final words echo like a prophecy. The crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood. By 1860, the nation teeters on the edge. Lincoln is elected president on a platform that opposes the spread of slavery into new territories. For Southern states, this is the final straw. South Carolina secedes first, then Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. They form the Confederate States of America, believing their way of life, and their right to hold people in bondage, must be protected at all costs. In the spring of 1861, Confederate forces fire on Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor. Smoke rises, cannons thunder, and the country plunges into civil war. Tonight, as you drift off, remember that America's story is not just about freedom boldly declared, but about freedom bitterly fought for, again and again. In the hush before battle, a young soldier writes a letter home by flickering lantern light, wondering if he will live to see the day when all people are truly free. And somewhere in the shadows, another freedom seeker touches the North Star, a guide through darkness toward hope. Now we enter the storm. It is April 1861. The sun rises over Charleston, South Carolina, as Confederate cannons open fire on Fort Sumter, a Union stronghold in the harbor. For 34 hours, the sky fills with smoke and flame. The American Civil War has begun. It will last 4 long years. It will claim more than 600,000 lives. And it will change the nation forever. The Union, the North, is led by President Abraham Lincoln, a man of towering intellect and quiet sorrow. He does not wish for war, but he believes the Union must be preserved. The Confederacy, the South, is led by Jefferson Davis, a former U.S. Senator who believes each state has the right to govern itself, including the right to uphold slavery. Both sides believe they are defending liberty, but their definitions of liberty could not be more different. The first major clash comes at Bull Run, just outside Washington, D.C. Spectators arrive in carriages, expecting a quick Union victory. Instead, they witness chaos, retreat, and blood. The war will not be over in weeks. It will grind on through seasons and cities, fields and forests. In the east, Confederate General Robert E. Lee emerges as a brilliant tactician. His Army of Northern Virginia wins stunning victories, despite being outnumbered and undersupplied. In the west, Union General Ulysses S. Grant fights with relentless determination, pushing down the Mississippi River, capturing forts, and laying siege to key Confederate strongholds. The war touches every corner of life. Railroads carry troops. Factories in the North produce rifles, blankets, and boots. Southern towns become makeshift hospitals. women step into new roles as nurses, factory workers, and organizers. By 1862, the war shifts focus. Lincoln, once hesitant, now sees that the Union cannot survive. Half slave and half free. On January 1, 1863, he issues the Emancipation Proclamation. It declares that all enslaved people in Confederate states shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. Though it doesn't immediately free all enslaved people, it changes the war's purpose. It becomes not just a fight for union, but a crusade for human freedom. Thousands of African Americans enlist in the Union Army. They fight bravely in segregated regiments, often with little pay and poor supplies. The 54th Massachusetts Infantry, led by Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, storms the walls of Fort Wagner. Many fall, but their courage stirs the nation. The war reaches its climax in July 1863, at a small town in Pennsylvania, Gettysburg. For 3 days, 150,000 men clash in the hills and fields. On the final day, Lee orders a desperate assault. Pickett's charge. A mile-long march into Union cannon fire. It fails. The South will never again invade the North. In November, Lincoln visits the battlefield. He speaks just 272 words. The Gettysburg Address. He reminds the nation that it was conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. He calls on the living to ensure that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. In the South, cities fall one by one. Grant lays siege to Vicksburg. General William Tecumseh Sherman marches from Atlanta to Savannah, cutting a path through Georgia in his famous march to the sea. He burns railroads, destroys crops, and breaks the South's will to fight. By April 1865, Lee's army is surrounded. He meets Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. The two generals, respectful and solemn, agree to terms of surrender. Grant allows Lee's men to keep their horses. He offers food and silence. There are no cheers, only quiet. The war is over. But 5 days later, on April 14, 1865, President Lincoln is shot at Ford's Theater by John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer. He dies the next morning, and the country mourns its greatest leader. His funeral train travels from Washington to Springfield, Illinois, stopping in cities where thousands line the tracks. Hats off, tears falling. The Union has held. Slavery, as a legal institution, is abolished. The 13th Amendment, ratified in December 1865, makes it law. But the wounds run deep. The South lies in ruins. Families are broken. Racism, violence, and division still simmer beneath the surface. Still, in this hour of exhaustion and hope, the dream of a better union remains. Tonight, as you rest, remember those who fought not only for survival, but for something bigger. A country where liberty, though uneven and unfinished, could someday belong to all. Now the guns have fallen silent, but the peace is fragile, and the question of what freedom truly means echoes through every dusty road, every courthouse, every church pew. It is 1865. The Union has survived, but the South lies in ruin. Cities like Richmond and Atlanta smolder, their railroads twisted like blackened ribbon. 4 million enslaved people are now free. Free to walk away from the plantations. Free to marry legally, to learn to read. To find family long separated by auction blocks. But freedom is not the same as equality. The period that follows is known as Reconstruction, an attempt to bind up the nation's wounds and redefine what it means to be American. President Lincoln's vision for reconciliation dies with him. His successor, Andrew Johnson, offers leniency to the former Confederates, but he opposes granting full rights to freedmen. Congress, led by the radical Republicans, pushes back. They pass the Civil Rights Act of 1866, granting citizenship to all born in the U.S., regardless of race. The 14th Amendment, ratified in 1868, guarantees equal protection under the law. The 15th Amendment, ratified in 1870, proclaims that the right to vote shall not be denied on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. For a moment, hope flickers brightly. Newly freed black men hold office for the first time. More than 2,000 during Reconstruction. Hiram Revels becomes the first African-American U.S. Senator. Black churches, schools, and businesses grow, offering sanctuary and self-determination. But the backlash is fierce. White supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan rise from the shadows, terrorizing freedmen and their allies with night raids, burning homes, lynching those who dare to vote or speak out. In the South, black codes are written, laws designed to keep African Americans in poverty and dependent on white landowners. Sharecropping replaces slavery in practice. Families work the same fields they once labored on as slaves, paying rent in crops, falling deeper into debt with each harvest. Reconstruction becomes a tug-of-war. Federal troops are stationed in the South to protect rights, but Northern will fades. In 1877, the contested election of President Rutherford B. Hayes brings a compromise. Federal troops withdraw from the South, effectively ending Reconstruction. Almost overnight, hard-won gains are stripped away. States enact Jim Crow laws, mandating segregation in schools, trains, theaters, and public spaces. Poll taxes, literacy tests, and violence keep black citizens from exercising their right to vote. Yet, the struggle for civil rights never fully goes dark. Families build mutual aid societies. Churches become centers of resilience. Educators like Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois debate the best path forward, industrial education or direct protest. Frederick Douglass, older now but still powerful, writes and speaks until his final days, reminding the nation of the promises made at its birth. Through it all, the promise of America is tested, but it is not entirely broken. In small rural schoolhouses, black children learn to read, even as their schools receive the fewest resources. In southern towns, black communities organize newspapers, marches, and boycotts, planting seeds that will grow into the civil rights movements of the 20th century. Reconstruction ends, but its questions linger. Who is an American? What does equality mean? How far must people go to claim the freedom they are promised? Tonight, as you drift off, imagine the hush of a cotton field at dusk. Picture the soft murmur of freed families gathering at a cabin's hearth, their voices rising in hope, their dreams passing from one generation to the next. For in this nation's story, the battle for freedom is never truly done. It is carried forward by the brave, the patient, and the tireless who believe that tomorrow can be better than today. Drift now into the late 1800s, a time when America's skyline begins to change forever. It is called the Gilded Age, a phrase coined by Mark Twain. Gilded, because beneath the glitter of wealth lies a core of struggle and inequality. After the Civil War, America's engines roar to life. Steamships ply the rivers. Railroads stitch the country together with iron rails, thundering westward, carrying people, cattle, coal. The Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869, connects Omaha to Sacramento, East Coast to West Coast, shrinking a journey of months to mere days. This steel web transforms trade and travel. Buffalo herds vanish under hunters' rifles, while cattle towns spring up on the prairie, Dodge City, Abilene. Frontier places alive with cowboys, saloons, and starlit nights. In the east, cities swell like living things. New York, Chicago, Pittsburgh, Detroit. Once modest towns, now vast metropolises of brick, iron, and glass. Immigrants arrive by the millions. They come from Ireland and Italy, Poland and Russia, China and Japan. At Ellis Island in New York Harbor, they stand in long lines, their names reshaped by hurried clerks, carrying only trunks, children, and hope. For many, this hope means factory floors. Men, women, and even children work 10, 12, sometimes 14 hours a day, pouring steel in Pittsburgh's foundries, sewing shirts in New York's sweatshop, packing meat in Chicago's slaughterhouses. The air smells of coal smoke and ambition. Some strike it rich. Men like Andrew Carnegie, who builds an empire on steel, or John D. Rockefeller, who refines oil into black gold. They are the new titans, celebrated for their vision, criticized for their ruthless methods. Mark Twain calls this the age of robber barons and captains of industry. Skyscrapers claw at the sky. Electric lights flicker on city streets, chasing away the darkness for the first time. Yet, beneath the glitter, tenements are crowded and grim. Families sleep 10 to a room. Diseases like tuberculosis spread in cramped quarters. Laborious fight for better pay and safer conditions. Unions rise, the Knights of Labor, the American Federation of Labor, organizing strikes that are met with violence and police batons. The Haymarket Affair in Chicago, 1886. A bomb explodes at a labor rally, killing police officers and civilians alike. Fear spreads, and workers' movements are branded as radical, dangerous. Out west, Chinese immigrants help build the railroads, but face fierce discrimination. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 becomes the first major law to ban an entire ethnic group from immigrating to the United States. Even so, the city lights grow brighter. Department stores open, offering the promise of consumer dreams. Ready-made clothes, canned food, and trinkets from faraway places. On Coney Island, working families spend Sunday afternoons by the sea, eating ice cream, riding wooden roller coasters, for a brief moment free from factory floors. In 1886, a statue arrives in New York Harbor. A gift from France, the Statue of Liberty. Her torch raised high for the tired and poor. She greets newcomers with Emma Lazarus's words. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. And so, they keep coming, from every corner of the world, seeking work, safety, or simply the chance to start again. Industrialists dream of profit. Workers dream of dignity. Immigrants dream of freedom. And in this swirl of steam, steel, sweat, and hope, modern America begins to take shape. Tonight, as you rest, imagine the hum of a city at night. Streetcars clattering down avenues. Factory whistles echoing at dawn. The glow of electric lights reflecting on rain-slicked cobblestones. Beneath it all, a restless promise pulses, that even in the grime and noise, there is possibility, a belief that a better life might still be built. Brick by brick, dream by dream, the new century dawns, bright and brimming with promise. But the shadows of inequality, corruption, and injustice remain. This is the progressive era, a time when ordinary citizens, journalists, and reformers rise up to challenge the excesses of the Gilded Age. Cities are choked with smoke, tenements overflow with families, and politicians often answer to corporate tycoons, rather than the people who elected them. Into this swirl come the muckrakers, fearless journalists who rake through society's filth, exposing what the powerful wish to hide. Ida Tarbell's scathing investigation of John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil shows how monopolies crush competition. Upton Sinclair's The Jungle reveals the sickening conditions in Chicago's meat-packing plants, so vivid that President Theodore Roosevelt orders sweeping reforms. Roosevelt himself becomes a symbol of the progressive spirit. A robust, energetic man, once a sickly child, he charges up San Juan Hill with his Rough Riders in the Spanish-American War, then rises to the presidency after William Kinley's assassination in 1901. Roosevelt believes the government should act as a referee between big business and the common people. He breaks up trusts, expands national parks, and builds the Panama Canal, a feat of engineering that links the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, forever changing trade routes. Progressives fight for safer working conditions, child labor laws, and the rights of workers to organize. Women lead the charge, figures like Jane Addams, who opens Hull House in Chicago to help immigrants, and Florence Kelley, who campaigns for minimum wage laws. The suffrage movement gathers strength. Women march through city streets, carrying banners and petitions. They face jeers, arrests, even hunger strikes in prison. Finally, in 1920, after decades of struggle, the 19th Amendment is ratified, giving women the right to vote. As America reforms itself within, it also flexes its muscles abroad. In 1898, the Spanish-American War sees the U.S. emerge as a new imperial power, claiming Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Cuba gains independence, but under America's watchful eye. Debates rage. Is America betraying its own ideals by ruling over other people's? Some say it is the nation's destiny to spread democracy. Others warn that empire brings moral decay. Meanwhile, waves of immigrants keep arriving from Eastern Europe, Asia, and Latin America, fueling industries, building railroads, mining coal. Tensions flare. Anti-immigrant sentiments simmer. Racial prejudice remains embedded in law and culture. In 1914, a distant spark ignites the First World War. At first, America watches from across the Atlantic. Its people divided, isolationist and interventionist voices clashing. But by 1917, German U-boats sink American ships, and the nation can no longer stand aside. President Woodrow Wilson asks Congress for a declaration of war, framing it as the war to end all wars and to make the world safe for democracy. American doughboys cross the ocean, young farmers and factory workers, now trudging through the mud of the Western Front. The war ends in 1918. Millions have died. At the Treaty of Versailles, Wilson proposes his vision for a League of Nations. But back home, Congress refuses to join. The United States steps into the new century, with one foot in idealism and another in reality. Strong, but divided. Modern, yet clinging to old prejudices. The Roaring Twenties are just around the corner, with flappers, jazz, and a stock market boom. But for now, the progressive era leaves a legacy, an understanding that democracy must be nourished, protected from greed, and reimagined for each generation. Tonight, as you close your eyes, picture the flicker of gas lamps on city streets, the scratch of pens as muckrakers expose the truth, and the steady heartbeat of reformers who believe that America's best promise lies not just in its power, but in its endless, imperfect push to do better. It is the dawn of the 1920s. The Great War is over, the doughboys come home, and the nation sighs with relief. This is the Roaring Twenties, a time when jazz bands play late into the night. Skirts grow shorter, and the rules of old begin to bend. America's cities shimmer with electric light. Skyscrapers pierce the clouds. The Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building, testaments to human ambition. Henry Ford's assembly line brings the automobile within reach of the middle class. Suddenly, people can go where they wish, speeding down dusty roads to beaches, lakes, and city speakeasies. Prohibition is the law. The 18th Amendment bans the manufacture and sale of alcohol, but in secret bars, known as speakeasies, bootleg liquor flows freely. Gangsters like Al Capone grow rich, ruling Chicago with bribes and bullets. Lawmen chase them through alleys and smoky jazz clubs. On dance floors, the Charleston kicks up, and the radio brings music, baseball games, and the voice of the president into every living room. A new cultural spirit stirs, the Harlem Renaissance. In New York City's Harlem neighborhood, black artists, writers, and musicians bloom. Langston Hughes writes poetry that sings of dreams deferred. Duke Ellington and Bessie Smith fill dance halls with the blues. echoes of centuries of struggle and hope. For many, this is a decade of wild prosperity. The stock market soars. Ordinary people invest their savings, certain the good times will never end. But beneath the glamour, cracks begin to show. Farmers, who fed the nation during the war, face falling prices and crushing debt. Factories produce more than people can buy. Banks lend recklessly. Then, on October 29, 1929, the world changes overnight. It is known as Black Tuesday. The stock market collapses. Fortunes vanish in hours. Investors leap from skyscraper windows. Banks fail, factories close, and lines for soup kitchens stretch around city blocks. America plunges into the Great Depression, a time of breadlines and dust storms, of hobos riding the rails, searching for work, hope, anything. In the Great Plains, the Dust Bowl arrives. Years of drought and poor farming practices turn rich soil into choking clouds of dust. Families pack their belongings into battered trucks, heading west to California, dreaming of orange groves and steady work. President Herbert Hoover urges patience, believing prosperity will return on its own. But the suffering deepens. 1 in 4 workers loses their job. Children stand barefoot in the snow selling apples. In 1932, the American people turned to a new leader, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. A man who once could walk, now bound to a wheelchair by polio, yet brimming with optimism. In his inaugural address, he speaks words that echo through time. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. With his New Deal, FDR launches programs to put people to work, building roads, bridges, dams, and national parks. The Civilian Conservation Corps sends young men into forests and fields, replanting a wounded land. Banks are stabilized. Social Security is born, promising help to the elderly and unemployed. Yet the depression drags on, a stubborn weight pressing down on the nation's spirit. Through it all, the American people hold fast. They share what little they have. They find solace in radio shows, swing music, and the movies. Flickering black and white dreams of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, of Shirley Temple's bright smile. The hard lessons of the 1930s will shape the nation's soul. A reminder that the American promise is not guaranteed, but must be rebuilt, together, in times of despair. Tonight, as you rest, picture the quiet resilience of those who stood in soup lines by day, and gathered by radios at night, waiting, always, for dawn to come. The clouds of war gather once more, this time not just over Europe, but the entire globe. In the late 1930s, Adolf Hitler rises in Germany, promising revenge for old wounds. Fascism spreads across Europe and Asia like a storm. Italy under Mussolini, Japan expanding across China and the Pacific. At first, America stays out, haunted by the pain of the last war. Many believe oceans will keep them safe. But as the Nazi war machine marches through Poland, France, and then pounds on Britain's door, the United States begins to stir. President Franklin D. Roosevelt calls the nation the arsenal of democracy. Factories that once made cars and toasters now roar with the forging of tanks, planes, and ships. Rosie the Riveter appears, her sleeves rolled up, a bandana tied tight, symbol of millions of women who enter factories while their brothers, husbands, and sons head to war. Then, the morning of December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor. Japanese planes descend on the U.S. naval base in Hawaii, leaving smoldering ships and over 2,400 Americans dead. The next day, Roosevelt stands before Congress and declares it a date which will live in infamy. America is in. Young men flood enlistment offices. They come from farms in Kansas, the crowded streets of Brooklyn, the cotton fields of Mississippi. They become GIs, government issue, carrying rifles and a sense of duty, into the battlefields of Europe, Africa, and the vast Pacific. At home, victory gardens bloom in backyards. Scrap metal drives turn pots and pans into ammunition. Ration books become daily life. But the home front is not free of its own shadows. In a wave of fear and prejudice, more than 100,000 Japanese Americans are forcibly removed from their homes and sent to internment camps. Barbed wire and guard towers in the deserts of California, Arizona, Wyoming. Even in a fight for freedom abroad, America wrestles with injustice at home. On the battlefields, the tide slowly turns. In North Africa and Italy, American troops join British allies to push back Nazi forces. On D-Day, June 6, 1944, the largest amphibious invasion in history lands at Normandy. Young soldiers wade through surf under machine gun fire, clutching letters from sweethearts back home. They fight village by village, hedge by hedge, toward the heart of Hitler's Reich. In the Pacific, brutal island battles rage. Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, where Marines raised the flag on Mount Suribachi, captured forever in a single, iconic photograph. At last, Germany falls. Adolf Hitler dies in a Berlin bunker. Victory in Europe is declared on May 8, 1945, VE Day. Crowds flood Times Square, strangers kissing in the streets. But the Pacific War grinds on. Then, a weapon unlike any seen before is unleashed, the atomic bomb. In August 1945, the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are destroyed. Tens of thousands perish in an instant. Japan surrenders. The war ends. America emerges victorious, but forever changed. Over 400,000 Americans give their lives. Millions more come home with scars, some seen, many not. The GI Bill helps veterans go to college, buy homes, build new lives. Women, who held up the factories, are urged to return to kitchens. Yet they have tasted independence, and seeds of change are sown. African American soldiers return to a segregated homeland, determined to fight for the freedom they were promised in uniform. The United States stands now as a superpower, locked in a new tension with the Soviet Union. A Cold War dawns, the Iron Curtain falls across Europe, and the atomic age begins. But tonight, drift back to the flicker of ration coupons, the tap-tap-tap of Morse code from distant fronts, the soft clatter of typewriters writing letters home. In the factories, the hum of Rose's riveting gun echoes through time, reminding us that courage comes not just from the battlefield, but from every hand that lifts to build a better tomorrow. The Second World War ends, but peace brings no simple calm. A new struggle emerges, not fought with tanks and trenches, but with spies, secret deals, and the looming threat of nuclear fire. This is the Cold War, a silent standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union, each armed with weapons powerful enough to end the world. An iron curtain falls across Europe. Germany, once the beating heart of war, is divided. West and East, democracy and communism. Berlin split down the middle by a concrete wall and watchtowers. America pledges to contain communism wherever it spreads. The Marshall Plan pumps billions of dollars into rebuilding Europe. NATO is formed, a shield of allied nations. At home, fear creeps in. Senator Joseph McCarthy waves lists of supposed communists, accusing Hollywood actors, professors, even government workers. Neighbors spy on neighbors, and the bright promise of liberty strains under suspicion. In classrooms, children hide under desks in atomic bomb drills. Tiny hands covering heads as if a wooden desk could block the sun's fury. While the Cold War's shadow looms, another battle burns brighter. The fight for civil rights. African Americans, veterans of World War II, return with new resolve. They have fought tyranny abroad. They refuse to accept it at home. In 1954, a case called Brown versus Board of Education reaches the Supreme Court. The justices declare that segregation in public schools is unconstitutional, separate but equal is no more. But laws on paper do not erase centuries of prejudice. In Montgomery, Alabama, a quiet seamstress named Rosa Parks refuses to give up her bus seat to a white man. Her arrest sparks a citywide boycott led by a young preacher, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. From Southern churches and college campuses, a movement grows, freedom riders, sit-ins, marches. They face police dogs, fire hoses, bombings, and bullets. In 1963, over 250,000 people gather at the Lincoln Memorial. Dr. King stands on the steps where Lincoln once spoke, his voice echoing across history. I have a dream. That dream shakes the nation awake. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act is passed, outlawing segregation in public places. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act secures the right to vote for millions, long denied a ballot. Yet, the 1960s are also a time of turbulence and heartbreak. President John F. Kennedy, young and full of promise, is cut down by an assassin's bullet in Dallas. Malcolm X, the fierce voice of Black pride, is gunned down in Harlem. Dr. King himself falls to an assassin's bullet in Memphis, his dream unfinished. The Cold War rages abroad too, in a jungle far from home. The Vietnam War pulls thousands of young Americans into a conflict many do not understand. Protests erupt on college campuses. Families gather around TVs each night to see jungles burning, helicopters thumping overhead, flag-draped coffins returning home. Trust in government phrase. Yet even in this unrest, there is movement forward. New voices rise, women demanding equality, Native Americans occupying Alcatraz Island to claim their rights, Latino farm workers marching for fair pay under Cesar Chavez. By the 1970s, the nation watches as the Cold War's chill seeps into every corner of politics. President Richard Nixon opens dialogue with China, a crack in the wall of global tension. But at home, the Watergate scandal reveals corruption at the highest level. For the first time in history, an American president resigns in disgrace. The country is weary of conflict abroad, of conflict at home. Yet it endures. Tonight, as you drift off, picture candlelit vigils held for fallen leaders. Crowds locked arm in arm singing "We Shall Overcome." The hush of footsteps crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge. The Cold War's icy tension. The civil rights movement's fiery courage. All woven into the same restless fabric. A reminder that America's promise is not a gift, but a challenge renewed in each generation. By those who stand up, speak out, and dream still. The Cold War thaws, not with a bang, but with the quiet fall of walls. In 1989, the Berlin Wall comes down. Hammers and bare hands tearing at concrete. A symbol of division crumbling under people's will. By 1991, the Soviet Union dissolves. For the first time in nearly half a century, the threat of nuclear Armageddon recedes, and America stands alone as the world's superpower. The economy booms. Silicon chips and fiber optic cables build a new frontier. The digital age. Companies like Microsoft and Apple turn garages into empires. The Internet, once the domain of scientists and the military, becomes a household word. A glowing screen that connects people across the world in an instant. Wall Street soars. .com startups promise a future of endless possibility. Yet prosperity is not shared equally. Factories close as industries move overseas. Towns once built on steel and coal feel abandoned by the very progress that was meant to lift them up. And then, one crisp September morning in 2001, terror strikes home. Hijacked planes crash into New York's Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and a Pennsylvania field. Nearly 3,000 lives lost in an instant. Smoke and ash billow across Manhattan's skyline. First responders rush in, some never to return. The nation unites in grief. Flags unfurl on porches, strangers comfort one another on subway cars. America declares a war on terror. Troops deployed to Afghanistan, then Iraq, seeking to dismantle terror networks and regimes that harbor them. Years pass. The wars drag on, long and costly, leaving behind questions that still echo today. Meanwhile, at home, change accelerates. A historic milestone arrives in 2008, when Americans elect their first black president, Barack Obama. He promises hope and a new kind of politics, his words echoing Dr. King's dream from decades before. Yet the country remains divided. The Great Recession hits, banks fail, millions lose homes and jobs. Anger at the powerful fuels movements left and right. Social media explodes. Once a place to share family photos, it becomes a digital town square for protest, misinformation, and outrage. Mass shootings, once unthinkable, become heartbreakingly familiar. Schools practice lockdown drills. Children learn to hide beneath desks for reasons their grandparents never imagined. And yet, resilience shines through. New generations stand up, marching for racial justice after the death of George Floyd, for the safety of schools after shootings in Parkland and Sandy Hook. Voices that were once silenced demand to be heard. #MeToo, Black Lives Matter. Millions gathering in city streets and town squares. The COVID-19 pandemic arrives like a storm, emptying highways, closing schools and businesses, taking loved ones too soon. Frontline workers, nurses, grocery clerks, delivery drivers keep the world turning. Vaccines arrive, but so too does distrust and division, reminding us that facts alone are not always enough to heal fear. Through it all, America remains a work in progress, a nation of immigrants and contradictions, triumphs and tragedies. From its ancient first peoples to the steel and glass towers of today, from civil rights marches to moon landings, and spacecraft reaching beyond the solar system, the United States is both restless and resilient. Its story is not one of perfection, but of promise, an idea that no matter how flawed the present may be, there is always another chance to bend the arc toward justice. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, picture the glow of a phone screen in the dark, a window to the world, a reminder of how far we've come, and how far there is still to go. Rest easy, knowing you carry the echoes of all who came before, the farmers and dreamers, the builders and breakers, the marchers and makers. The story of America is not finished. It lives on, in you, in all of us. One dream whispered to the next, under the soft hush of a starry sky. Thank you for joining me tonight, on this journey through centuries of stories, voices, and moments that shaped the United States. From ancient peoples who first called these lands home, to explorers, revolutionaries, dreamers, and everyday families, the threads of history weave together in ways that remind us how deeply connected we all are. I hope this gentle telling has brought you not just knowledge, but calm, a chance to drift off with a sense of wonder, knowing you're part of this ever-changing story. As you close your eyes now, feel free to let your thoughts wander like a river, gently flowing through forests, mountains, plains, and cities, carrying with it the voices of those who came before you. If you enjoyed this bedtime journey, please remember to like the video, subscribe to Sleepy Time History, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Every listen, every like, every story helps us grow this cozy corner of history lovers who just want to rest easy, drift deep into sleep, and dream of the past. I'm so grateful to have shared this time with you. Sleep well, my friend. Good night.